before we get going, I'm going to, in no particular order, well, that order actually, I'm going to ask the panel to introduce themselves, and I'll start with Robert, and just give a little synopsis of your amazing experience and career.
Yeah, have a bounce.
No, well, you'll be really brief.
Robert Baldry. Just about my whole life in this industry. I'm probably a wholesaler at heart, but quick introduction would be Spices, Vasanta, Vow, obviously Banner, Evo, and more recently Staples, and now Defo. So I only need to tick the Lyrico box and I can go bingo.
You haven't done a dealer group, have you?
Haven't done a dealer group?
No. There you are, which leads us very nicely on to Kim.
Hi, Kim Brown. I know quite a few of you actually. I've been in the industry for 35 years, so actually pretty similar to Robert. Many of the wholesalers have been in that. I started with Brady & Hunt, which was a wholesaler in London, watched me both fly over all those years ago. And from there, pretty much worked for most of the wholesalers, and also for my sins ran buying groups for 16, 17 years. So now in Exertis Supplies, so back into distribution again.
Kim,
good morning everyone. My name's Mark Wilkinson. I'm the Regional Vice President and General Manager of Acco Brands. And I've been there 23 years, lots of different jobs. I think they'll hopefully find me what I'm good at soon. But yeah, that's me.
Ian?
Yeah, hello. Ian Haywood, Managing Director of UKOS. I started out in the industry 30 years ago working for big box providers, Offrex, Nice Day, Office Depot, before setting up UKOS about 20 years ago with partners, and been running the business for the last 10 years as Managing Director, but before that was Sales Director, and before that was Logistics Director, so sort of quite a broad experience there.
Great, thank you. So you can see we've got, as I said earlier, pretty much all of the supply chain, if you want, covered on the panel, either current or past experience. Whilst we don't have anyone from OT or Val here, well, we do have someone from Val actually. We have Kath, who's the sales director from Val there. She's not going to be the sales director for too much longer actually, because I'm delighted to say that she's going to join us. But I mentioned that because we might talk about wholesalers and supply chain, and it's important that we have an expert in the room. But she still works with Val for another 2 or 3 weeks, so she has to behave accordingly. So I'm going to start with a question, and then we're hopefully going to have lots of questions. Mine's actually, I don't even need to look at my notes on this. So Nick's opening part of his presentation talked about how the economic forecasts look quite positive, and he talked about a V. I mean, it could be more of a W, but I don't want to get all Sesame Street on Nick. But my question to all of you is: do you feel, with your sector-specific hat on, do you feel as optimistic about those forecasts on a V return for our sector? And we'll just go this way for the moment. We'll mix it up and get creative later on.
No, probably not as positive as Nick. Simply because I think some of those macro trends or the global trends that we talked about earlier are starting, or have been, are starting to bite. And I think there's, it's hard to see how it will play out, but in my opinion, there's definitely a change in the way that we're working, which has changed the dynamic of the supply chain for us. So I think that there are winners and losers there, but if you're supplying businesses in offices, as a lot of us do, then I think there's a different trend working against that V. So I think it will come back, no question. Difficult to say at the moment with the current kind of pingdemic, as they call it, to know quite how that's going to go in the next few weeks. But it will come back. But I just don't think it's going to come back as hard, and I don't think it will come back. It's never coming back the way it was, in my view.
Okay, Kim?
Yeah, I agree. I think it also depends on where you are geographically, and also how you operate or your business is structured currently as well, as to the level of enthusiasm, if you like, and positivity going forward. If I speak to lots of more traditional dealers, then I have to say I don't share Nick's enthusiasm for what that looks like going forward. But if you've got a niche market, then yeah, I said there's some buoyancy returning. But we fundamentally have to change how we operate, and I see that as an opportunity rather than anything else that we have to change.
Okay, so I might come back to the interesting point there on the small traditional dealers not being so optimistic, but come back to that maybe, or maybe someone will riff on it in the audience. Mark, how about your view as maybe specific to Acco, because there's a bit of pivoting going on in Acco. You haven't had such a bad pandemic.
Yes, I think I'd say it's going to be very uncertain. I think that's the one thing we'll all agree on. It's going to be very, very uncertain. I think the short term is going to be quite difficult because of the supply chain challenges, inflation, just the general uncertainty. We don't know what's going to happen next. But I would say I'm a little more optimistic. As a vendor, we've been able to pivot away from some traditional products away to more technology, and we've pivoted quite quickly in some areas. And I think that's allowed us to ride out the pandemic relatively well, if you look at it from an economic perspective. But I do think it's hard to know what the true base business will look like in the future. What is the traditional consumption going to be when we go back to something akin to a post-pandemic world?
So Kim said changing is really important, and you're saying that you're a bit more optimistic about Acco because you pivoted or changed early on. You've basically taken your manufacturing and you put it into product where there's a growth area and diverted it away from product where there wasn't. Okay.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right, and if you hadn't done that, if you hadn't changed, then I guess you'd be feeling slightly more pessimistic.
Absolutely right, yeah. I think if you're not able to, we're very fortunate. We're at the sort of top of the supply chain, so we can pivot to where the consumer's going more easily than perhaps others further down the supply chain. And I think that's the advantage we have. But we've still got to place the right bets, and I think we've been either lucky or fortunate, or hopefully some good decisions as well. And then those two have come together, and we've done okay.
I really wanted to ask another question, but time is tight, so I'll come back if we have time. Ian, how are you feeling about the future?
Well, broadly optimistic, and I wouldn't disagree with the outlook presented on the economy. But in the short term, question marks and content. I'm not sure how relevant it is though, because the bigger question is what's happening in our market, in our sector.
Yeah.
The economy can boom, but it doesn't necessarily mean it will be good for us, but rather that than anything else. But I don't think it's the biggest question. I find talking to people broadly, people tell me that the market is running at maybe 65-70% of pre-pandemic. Would anyone disagree with that very much?
On an average,
65-70% of before COVID.
Maybe 70 if you take
that depends on what.
Okay. I just don't think it's going back to 100%.
Yeah.
And I don't mean it's not going back soon. I don't think it's ever going back to 100%. I think probably some of the trends that were already there in the sector have just been accelerated.
Exactly right. I think that's we talk. I mean, I think Nick mentioned it a couple of times, but that idea of 10 years of something happening in 3 or 4 months, this acceleration. How many conferences and articles have we been to and talked about where we've talked about the digitisation of the office and the impact that's had on traditional office products? That's just had a massive accelerating effect put under it, because people have suddenly discovered that they can work on teams, that they, so there's a whole product set. I think that kind of 5 to 8% decline that we've talked about for years, it's been going on for maybe 10, 15 years, I would guess has been massively accelerated as a result of this.
So let me just ask one more question, being greedy, sorry about that. I don't know, I guess the question of the audience, let's just do a small kind of poll. Let's start at 65 and go up in 5s, but then let's go up in 10s, okay? So who thinks that it's going to it's 65 now, who thinks, I don't think many people normalise it.
Are we talking about the core office problem?
We're basically talking about it's a really good question. Because if Mark's pivoted, you see what I mean, and all that. I think what we're talking about, because it's easier, is core office products. Okay, or let's actually call it wholesaler business. because ultimately most of us historically have fed off a wholesaler. Okay, let's say a wholesaler has 30,000, maybe not quite.
About 20,000.
20,000 products. Okay, those 20,000 products that historically would kind of buy through that channel. Where do we think that is going to return to? Anyone think? Let's, it's a really broad question, so don't overthink it. Is anyone on 65? Anyone on 75? Okay, 75. Okay, 2 on 75. I feel like an auctioneer. Anyone on 85? 85. Okay.
80 will do me, so.
Okay. 80.
80, yeah.
Okay, I know I should have started on 70.
You said 5.
I know. It would have been all day, and Lena would have got like a bit stroppy, a bit more stroppy. Anyone on 105? Come on, 105. It's a beautiful economy. Anyone on 105?
If we're including spices business that we got,
Okay.
if it's just
So, okay.
That's just market
Yeah, share. Okay, that's interesting. So we are talking about 85 to 90%. Okay, roughly where people kind of normalised, I think. Right. If we're at 90%, let's
Are you saying now?
No, I think where it's going to end up.
That's what I was saying.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, where it's going to end up. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't prepare this very well. Anyone want to change their hands? Okay, everyone roughly comfortable that we normalise on 90. Okay, let's play with 90.
Did we agree that we're at about 70 now? I might have missed.
I think that the problem is that different people's businesses are at different levels. And then you've got the problem with products, what product people are selling, PP and all of that. I think that if it wouldn't have been possible for Spices and Val to still be here, by the way, is my view. No offence to anyone, but if Spices hadn't gone, Val would have, and vice versa. Only my view, not to be spread too freely. Camera on. But if Spices and Val were both there and we looked at the wholesale business now, I think you'd find it would be around 70-75%. Those businesses would be running now of what they are. Where they would end up, that's what we're guessing. But let's just say it's 90. So if you've got 10% less turn, then most of us could begin to think about what the problem is in our sector, I think, because I kind of need Nick and a spreadsheet, but 10% less turn for most businesses, forget the pressure on gross margin and everything, and cost inflation, sell price transparency, shift to one line, which typically brings down the price. So I want to talk about that a little bit. What do you think will happen if it normalises at 90? In the dealer, because I want to bring it into dealer if I can, in the dealer sector. So there's kind of 3 options, aren't there? There is, what do you think? I'll go the opposite way. So Ian, if I start with you.
I think there will be some casualties. I think probably there are some really progressive dealers who've thought about this and made adjustments to their business. And I think probably most people in this room, we had that interesting conversation, didn't we? What are we talking about here? Is it office supply?
Yeah.
Most people in this room don't just sell office supplies. And that diversification over the last however long it's been has probably, saved our bacon during the last 12 months. Certainly that's the case for UKOS, I'm sure it is for others. But I have friends in the industry and they're sitting on their hands not really doing anything.
Yeah.
And I fear for what will happen when all the support unravels and the turnover doesn't come back that they may be expecting to come back. And I think probably the structural changes in our industry, aren't over.
Okay, yeah, interesting. So change or die?
I think so.
Okay, yeah. Mark?
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that at all, actually. I think there will be consolidation. I think there has to be. I think at the minute there's too much supply in the long term for the size of the market that will exist in the future, particularly if we go to that 90% level.
Yeah.
So I think that will mean either some dealers will either get swallowed up by other stronger, bigger dealers, or perhaps they will have to be, brought into the wholesaler, as we've seen previously with Spices and also with that.
Yeah.
So I think those two things will happen. I think the only reason they're not happening today is what you said to me a few times about furlough.
Yeah.
And therefore, that quarter 4 will see a lot of movement, I think.
Okay.
I'll do a bit of that. I think one interesting thing that it's only a guess really that we've all been very familiar with acquisitions in our industry. I wonder if this might lead to more mergers, strong businesses, strong confident businesses thinking, okay, look, the market isn't what it was, we have had this situation, will two mergers of two strong companies be the way forward? I think we might see more of that.
Okay, so come back to the because Robert right now, who you don't mind, is kind of in the space where, and only say as much as you can, but where Aurelius or Depot are offloading quite quickly, right? Their portfolio, if we call it that, or their the different business units. And then I guess it's a concept of a merger or an acquisition. Okay, and I always get a little bit confused. But most of the offloading, if I can say that, is when it's a trade exit, effectively, from what I can see. I know that there are some discussions around PE coming to certain parts of that your group, but is there such a thing as a merger at a large level, where it's a kind of equal merger in our sector, or is it always a kind of distressed kind of acquisition positioned as a merger at a high level?
Well, I think we've seen over the so a few things on that. I think we've seen what we've seen as acquisitions. Certainly, some of the larger ones have been using a kind of a leverage model, which is mainly about as I always call it, borrowing someone's watch and then telling them the time. So you negotiate with the dealer who wants to exit, you get hold of their business, fact their debt, use that money to pay them some, then pay the rest on the drip, and that's how it works. I would say that model, I'm frankly surprised that, and I won't name names, but I'm surprised that some of the people operating those models have survived so far, because factoring is a great way to finance a business if you're growing, but with some of the turn down that we've seen, God only knows how some of these people have survived. PE, I think, is really interesting. If we look at private equity, I think largely now, the more recent things that have been going on, you're actually going back to seeing people who are trade players making acquisitions, and PE are really trying to exit. Endless would love to exit either. It's not. I don't think I'm saying it's a surprise. When a PE house has its 10th anniversary of owning something on a cycle that should be 3 years, then So PE are really largely, they want out, and I don't see any PE interest in replacing. So we're not really looking at second round here. The people who have bought in by and large are the trade. Paragon, as you know, Paragon have come in with the first office team and now have just taken a large chunk of depot. Look at the continent. You've got Raja, who's come in, Lyrico. These are all Bruno. These are all trade players. They're not. I mean, Bruno's private equity, but I would say, capacity-wise, we are seeing capacity come out of the chain. Right. If you think about what's happened in this country in the last few years, the Staples Rockingham facility, which was 500,000 square feet, has gone. It's Wincanton, and it's running business that's outside our industry now. The deal that I've just done with Depot and Paragon will result in them going to centralising their business in Ashton. That's another. If you think about it, there were 2 warehouses, and that will become 1. So I can see capacity coming out of the supply chain now, and it really needs to your point earlier. There's just too much.
So these are distressed M&A, right?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So let's come back to the change agenda. So I think we all agree, and I'm coming to you, Kim. Just give you a warning. We've all agreed that the change agenda is more critical than it's ever been. Dealers need to change. Okay, if we're coming to dealers in order to survive, there's a kind of rough walk of change or die. What parts, and I might open up, but what parts of a dealer need to change then? How do they change?
I think the challenge we've got with some of the dealers is they're so busy just physically in their businesses running them at the moment, stepping back from them and coming up with some views as to what they should be looking at is a challenge, it's a real challenge. In terms of what they should change, it depends on where they're at the moment and what their customer mix is.
At a generic level, what is that? So we saw earlier, which aren't on screen, but some of the key trends that are coming.
Yeah, I mean, so cost to serve.
Yeah.
I think it's difficult for me to sort of, I think a lot of dealers have to change in a lot of areas. Okay?
Yeah.
So
Give me a couple.
Skills, classic example. I think the better understanding of the true cost to serve of an operation is
Right.
one as well. Automation and technology is poor in our sector. It's been poor for a long, long time. I'm not leading nicely into what we want to say later, but that's true because I've got the back office software houses, so I can see the challenges. So, and that's the problem that you've got. There are so many things small businesses and particular dealers probably do need to address. It's where to start.
Maybe a recognition also that the customer and what the customer wants to buy has fundamentally changed.
Okay, so product range.
I mean,
Product diversification.
If you hadn't pivoted,
Right. Automation. Okay. Just pause and I'll come back on that. Has anyone got a different view or any questions they want to ask the panel? If we keep on the theme of where on this kind of change agenda, given the world is changing around us. Yeah, Dave.
You're talking about volume or
Yeah.
what they're selling. I have a very strong view. If I look at my answer, you guys must answer for me. If you said you were doing 70%, how much less volume are you actually doing rather than how much?
That's interesting. So the question, Nick, in case you're here, is if you're doing 70% or even 80% or whatever of your turn, how does that materialise into volume? Is the premise there, just lost the question that because you're selling different products,
Saying lots of products.
Yeah. Okay.
And if I was to do £1 million a month,
Yeah.
and I sent out £8,
Yeah.
do I only need £7? Do I need £6? Or still need 8?
Right.
Can I also just slightly add something to your question, which is maybe related, but that's about supply chain and how much. Good question for the audience, but how is the balancing changing between those 20,000 products that you can get from a traditional wholesaler and the drop ship stuff that you're doing from everybody else?
Right. So I wasn't really thinking the balancing was.
Is that what you're driving?
I was the holistic view of how much is going out.
Physical lineage.
I think are you talking about
line my moving?
Physical lineage.
And
yeah.
if I was to move the same products because of inflation, how much inflation do you think's in there?
I see. I get
So
it.
how much less do we actually move?
Right. Sorry, I understand that. So I think the question, the way Dave's riffing is, we've seen significant inflation, right?
2 years.
Right. Okay. Over 2 years, maybe 10-15% on cost prices. Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to get to.
Yeah. So 10-15% cost price increase over 2 years. Okay. So net that off, right, and then off our 70 or 80 or whatever it is. And then you're into kind of 60% territory.
That's what I'm saying. I'm telling my team that we were doing 13 million 2 years ago. We did 13 million last year.
Yeah.
200 grand.
Yeah.
So if we don't do 15.1 this year, we're still still.
Yeah. We're right. Okay. That's and the cost of distributing that isn't going down, right?
Now, if you do 15.1, you're going to make a bit more money, aren't you?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because the cost of fixed.
Yeah. Yeah. So, how does the dealer change to address that dynamic? Because actually what Dave is saying, the like-for-like sales are down and the cost of distribution is the same. And dare I add one, that the average order size is down, right, dramatically, because if you're at home, you consume 60% less traditional. Now we might come off to traditional in a minute, but let's just stay with a minute. So that's one of the macro drivers in our sector. Then how do you change?
What else that's back to diversification, what else can you sell, I would say anyway, what else can you sell where you don't necessarily have to even touch it, right?
Okay.
You've got that customer relationship, you know what those customers are buying, they're probably buying it from someone else. What else can you add that will increase your AOV, but actually those products are going to come from, one of the many players who will quite happily deliver that on your behalf?
Okay, let me ask this question on behalf of someone in the audience. It could be me. What we saw when Spices demised and we went to the pandemic is, I think that Val's numbers, Catherine will ask you to disclose it, I think that Val's numbers, dropship numbers, their mix went from being about 40% to 71, went up to 80.
35 to 80, it's back down at about 65 to 68.
Okay, so it went from 30 to 80, and now it's back down at 65. Okay. And there was wagon wheels conversations, and everyone, including me, was saying that dropship is the way forward, right? So, a question for the audience, okay? How satisfied, not only with Val, careful with Kim's here and everything else, but how satisfied, put your hand up if you're totally satisfied with the service levels that you're getting from a dropship order 70% of the time? I think I'll probably do 70% of the time. Yeah, okay. I'll do that 80% of the time. Okay, 90% of the time. Okay, that's Kim's on. 90% of the time. 90, sorry, 100. Okay, so the majority of us is satisfied 80% of the time, and we know that customers are dramatic and all of that. So then the options are, do we put costs back in? Because if we've taken it out, because we have taken it out, because we furloughed a lot of our drivers short term, right? Or if we're at 90%, can we put those drivers back in? Because that's putting costs back in. And if we can't, then we're only 80% on average, 80% satisfied with our distribution. So that's a conundrum that I haven't solved yet. Has anyone got a view on that?
Well, I think it's managing the consumer expectation as well in this mix, because we're trying to go back to exactly where we were pre-pandemic, which is over-servicing the marketplace by providing consumers with everything very quickly, next day, without even challenging that concept and asking them would they accept a slightly different service. So there are some dealers that very successfully deliver into region 2 or 3 days a week on fixed days, or they use the green argument to change and to have a more sustainable service model. But sadly, what I'm seeing is that it's the path of least resistance. It's easier for people to go back to where they were because they think that's what the consumer demands.
Okay. That's a really interesting point. So you adjust your cost base by adjusting your service levels, because high service is high cost. Okay, that's helpful. Robbie?
No, I just want to pick up on what Kim says there.
Yeah.
That's how you change. You define the customer base, and you apply your proposition relevant to that customer base. Because you don't sell product, you sell productivity. That's what Kim said.
Yeah.
You sell procurement.
Yeah.
You're the experts. We've been in it 20 years.
Yeah.
You go, if you can sell to an organisation the concept of you've heard it before. You carry on with your core business, we'll look after the rest.
Yeah. We
did that in the healthcare sector in Catalyst about 8 years ago. So, we'll help, you care.
Yeah.
So you do the caring, because they're flat out anyway. We'll help with all the product, and then you find the supply chains you need.
Yeah.
But that's the way forward. And when I originally did it, I went to a green conference in Wandsworth, and everything was about the product.
Yeah.
So the manufacture of the product was green. The delivery of it was stupid.
Yeah.
We'll give it to you before you even thought you needed it.
Yeah.
Same day on the motorbike straight across town.
Yeah.
So Kim's bang on.
Yeah.
Use the green label to not reduce your service offering, but make it much more sensible. Because there's only so many products that are business critical. We did the analysis, and it's normally ink and paper in an office.
Yeah.
You do that, most of the stuff.
Or to turn it on its head, only put those vehicles back if you can drive value, right? So the only reason that you do
value to your business or value to
your business,
the customer?
Will the customer pay for something that if you can put service back and the customer will pay for it, or it will give you competitive advantage, then put it back. But actually, that's you have to be as absolutely as cold as that when you're looking at it.
I think if you take your hands off the road, though, you're losing out on a massive marketing advantage. Part of what you're paying for by sending your vans to guys out is people seeing people.
You mean the brand awareness?
Yeah, brand awareness.
Okay. Yeah, and a lot of dealers we speak to at the moment, because they do feel the pain of the supply chain disruption. Actually, feel like they want to manage that, at least that last mile, to make sure they try and hold on to their customers Okay, let's change tack. I don't know where we're going. Who's got a question for the panel? Yeah.
Great. Talk about casualties coming up. Is a review, and might hear from some of mine too. Are we going to see the re-emergence of repack administrations in the industry? Because there is an impressive amount of money that's been borrowed. Seriously impressive. And in one or two cases, just looking at accounts, I think that just isn't going to get paid back.
Yeah.
So are the wholesalers, the manufacturers concerned that we're going to see the emergence of a done one day agreement?
Yeah.
And if that is the case, what plans are being made to offset the risks to their businesses?
Okay, so Nick, I don't
See if
know.
that's the case, how do you do it?
Yeah.
Just
Hang on, just want to make sure Nick, did you hear that?
I did hear it, yeah.
Okay, great. Okay. So before we go to the panel, everyone heard that, everyone gets it, which is a huge amount of debt. One of my questions that we got there is, can our sector afford to pay back the debt, right? If it's government debt, it's easier to default on, dare I say. If it's supplier debt, then it has repercussions. So if you can't pay back the debt for whatever reason, and we get that crunch point where we talked about shakeout, are we going to see pre-pack as a way of supporting M&A? Rob?
I was just going to say, I think one fundamental change that we've got, which may make that more difficult, is the fact that we've really got one predominant wholesaler. And if I think back to some of the more infamous pre-packs over the years, some of which I've been on the end of the phone call saying, we're not going to pay you. Quite a lot of that was, people bouncing from Spices to Vow. And, I'll lose a load of debt with Vow and start in Spices tomorrow. And I had many a conversation with Jeff Whiteway back in the day about we need to stop this.
Well, we did this. We sat down and you and Jeff, because a business model that is very aggressively, sometimes compared to ours, is all about pre-pack, right? And it was about taking debt from one wholesaler and writing it off and trading with the other. And you and Jeff put out an agreement that said you won't support that. Now there was a change, but I think the point is that can Vow, Evo or Vow, support mass pre-pack? Well, I think Mark made the point, well, we just have to wrap them in.
Well, I was going to say, I think much more likely as a result of that structure now is that you won't see a pre-pack as much as the wholesalers will just suck those businesses into their own business in the same way as Vow have already done or Banner have done.
But the intention from the dealer side would be that they can continue, so that the preferred option is they don't get absorbed into the wholesaler or absorbed into the manufacturer. Their aim would be to continue down the road, share the liabilities and keep going.
But how do you do that?
Well,
If you're only leaving the debt with one supplier.
If it's wholesaler debt, I think I don't know. I think you're going to struggle because you can't trade with that wholesaler. They'll take ownership of the shares. I'm too young to remember this, but I think post 2008 there was some businesses. I was 9. There was some businesses that went into were a bit sketchy and were absorbed into Spices and into Vow for exactly that reason. And then there was an integral breakaway that just said, hang on, there's a business model here. I'm just going to default on what I'm going to take in mind advisors, default on that wholesaler debt and trade over here. But that can't help. That doesn't work when there was a monopoly, I think.
I think if you take the situation with Spices last year, Paragon hadn't come in the end and essentially rescued the carcass of Spices and Steam, then I don't see what the outcome for Spices would look like. I can see it would be very, very bleak. So I think that kind of pre-pack administration for that situation, I don't think would have led to a lot of supplier support, for example. I think the only reason that Office Team Group is getting any support at all today is because Paragon own it. And it's a brand new business, it's completely different, and you've got to let bygones be bygones. But if the carcass had remained in some other form and it just financially restructured, I don't think it would have got much support.
But to Paul's point, the owners of spices, forget the best capital and the layering of the debt, right, and all of that. But the owners, if you take a small dealer, the owner of the dealer, when it's absorbed into the wholesaler, walks away with nothing. They can't rise up, I don't think, and trade on because they won't be supported by the trade. I don't think the wholesalers are looking for our account. I don't think that I can imagine Val supporting dealers retaining a share in their business.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
No, if you look at, I mean, we could probably talk about it now because it's a long time ago, but look at Yes 2.
Yeah, well, I did
that deal, and I think there were employment contracts, and that was it. Nothing else.
Yeah.
So we kept steep.
Yeah, I know you know.
Doesn't matter his name. Okay.
Do you think that the wholesalers might instead start reducing credit terms?
We did it already.
To reduce their exposure.
Okay, Kim said that they're already doing that.
We are notoriously harsh on credit. We have been from the start.
Kim enjoys that part of the job. Kath?
Yeah, we're constantly reviewing that
Yeah.
on a monthly basis.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, so I think the wholesalers are scared of that. So would I be if I had some of the levels of debt that are out there with businesses that, to Ian's point, are sitting on their hands waiting to see what's going to happen, which brings us back to the kind of change agenda. I think wholesalers are up for a discussion around a payment plan and a haircut, because that's some way they'll get some money back. And I'm not sure how much appetite, certainly Val or Exertis, well, no, there's probably minimal appetite, have to wrap broken businesses into their. I think that most of them would prefer just a correction and supply. I don't know. I mean, obviously it's complicated, Evo, because they have wrapped businesses into Banner, and I guess they might do a couple of big ones that given the stable situation, that was a kind of wrapping without debt.
On those points, it started off really, they've got government debt.
Yeah.
So they've got and if you get a certain level of government debt, you'll put security.
Yeah.
But if you know what the figure is, but it might be half a million quid, £4 million.
Yeah.
If you get popped around that level, dealer, and he Phoenixes, and the wholesalers pick them up, but actually sell them from government.
So there's a good point, Nick. I don't know if you heard David's point there, but let's take a dealer that's defaulting on government debt. It might be HMRC, it could be bounce back loans, it could be whatever, and then the mass administration processes, and we know that assets in a business are devalued through an administration process, and let's say a stronger dealer picks them up.
But I wasn't even thinking this one. They were out from the Phoenix. Mr. VAT, Mr. PAYE, don't pay the government loans back, but actually pay the wholesaler.
Well, that does happen now. Nick, there's the point. Is the government going to get tighter on Phoenixes with government debt? I don't know what I'm asking you.
They already were pre-pandemic.
So tightening up on it?
They used to be quite relaxed with things like sort of VAT, and they used to let you negotiate time to pay agreements quite happily, and they got a lot tighter on that in the last kind of 5 to 10 years since the 2008 crisis, and they will put businesses into administration if they don't get paid back. It's happening, and they now are owed a lot more money by the business community, so you can guarantee they'll start.
I think Nick mentioned the 30th of September date, and I don't know if you know that, but they are legally unable to petition for wind-ups, insolvency wind-ups, HMRC, until the 30th of September. But the other side of that, beginning of October, I read the other day that 60% of small businesses haven't even talked to them about payment plan, and there's talk that come October they won't even be in the mood to discuss, they're just going to pass it to their debt collection agency, and then you're in a deep dark hole when you've got HMRC's debt collection agency after you. But they can't do anything until the end of September, and then the gloves are off.
I mean, I wonder how they're going to have all these conversations, how they're going to administer them, because there's so much data out there, you've got to have the actual...
and the political backlash of winding up loads of businesses, but so it is a fine line that they're going to have to play, but...
Okay, thanks, man.
If you don't talk to them, you're on that.
Yeah. Okay. Let's. Any other questions? I've got a few. But who wants to riff on a particular topic? Let's go back to the change thing and think about dealers. Let me ask questions of dealers here. Have any of you got plans that you want to share on how you have already changed or how you are changing to make sure that you survive? And that sounds a slightly harsh way of putting it. I think most of you here are in relatively, probably all of you are in good shape. That's why you're here. But does anyone want to share their change plans as we come out? That'd be great.
We had a good COVID year, so we have money.
Yeah.
So we've not spent it, but we spent quite a bit of money. We've got quite an expensive 9-week sales training course for sales force.
Okay.
We brought a guy in to do a lean view on our entire processes.
Right. Okay.
Especially anybody who's work, took an awful lot of bottlenecks out for us.
Okay.
Ongoing, we've written some software on the back of that will make it so much more visible to us to see what the problems are.
Right.
And then we've also brought from one of these companies, a marketing director type ADM, but not to do leaflets and stuff, but strategically try and change the business.
Right.
And what's the sector we're going to go after? Who are the customers that we're doing good business with? So let's get after more of those. So it's quite expensive, but because we've had a good year, I was willing to invest in it.
Yeah.
I can see the sales training thing. My people, if they don't pick up the call, well, make a call. Don't ask, have a call at the bad time.
Yeah.
You should be shocked.
Right. Okay.
Because if you actually say, yes, you have, it's dead easy to get a good time a bit later.
Yeah. Okay. That's that. So I think Nick made a point earlier, which is true. In recessions or in periods of great shock, businesses that have strong balance sheets that go in strong, like yours does, David, comes out relatively stronger and relatively, the deeper the shock. You might come out with a slightly weaker balance sheet, but relatively compared with everyone else's. I think what you're doing, I'm pretty cool there. You're kind of doubling down and going, I'm going to invest my way out of this.
Well, our view was we would only ever get 80% spend on stationery.
Yeah.
A year, March last year. I called COVID in the January because we got rid of everything we did with one. Cashed in my shares, everything by the 8th of February. And we said the only way out of this is growth.
Right.
We have to have a bigger piece of the smaller pie.
Okay.
So the sales force have been absolutely lashed it into their lives for 18 months now to get more business.
Got it.
Yeah,
okay, excellent. Who else has anyone else got any change, either planned or changes that they are planning to make that they want to share? Thank you. Okay.
I think
Darren.
Yeah. We're going to be playing more on our regional status, and lots of businesses are now approaching us on supporting them on a B Corp journey. A B Corp is still relatively unknown, but it's become a more regional-based process, a pre-qualification process. And some of our bigger customers that we've won have approached us and said, "What's your impact assessment on your business regionally, locally? We want to work with businesses within a 25-mile radius, and obviously what we offer enables them to consolidate and us to implement improvements and suggestions." So we're on an impact assessment journey. I just think regionally that's something that more businesses will.
Yeah. So can you the B Corp bit plays into CSR, it plays into regionality, all of that sort of stuff. Yeah. So exactly that. So that's really that kind of plays into the green agenda a little bit, right? So you're kind of pivoting but you're adjusting your strategic positioning of the business and the way that you do business to kind of play to the green trend. Yeah. Okay. And local trend, which is
and enhance the service.
Yeah.
It's more about ecological deliveries, improving average order values, collections and deliveries, recycling, repurposing. And a few businesses around us are actually dilapidating some of their buildings. We're joining up with charities and non-profit organisations in repurposing that kit. So it opens up doors for lots of broader conversations.
Yeah.
Pandemic's a bit reversal of buying local, hasn't it? Because we lost that. Historically it's very much national, and now the pandemic is making people want to be more local and regional again and support local businesses, which is lovely to see. And I know that's retail based, but it's also general businesses because of employment and all the other benefits. So
yeah, I think Kath and I were talking about this. Hybrid working means that you do work from home. When you work from home, you consume in theory 60% less, but you're working from home. And when Robbie talks about distressed purchases, you need it on that high service level of paper and ink. Well, you could go to your local convenience store, and actually I believe there's growth in convenience, which is quite interesting. Elena's just done that at me, which is a bit rude. I didn't think I'd done that badly. So we've got time for, I think, 2 more questions. I think that's what she was saying. Who? I've got a couple more, but has anyone got anything they want to ask the panel? No?
Can I ask one about general kind of panel feeling on the whole well-being market, people working, mental health,
Okay.
physical health?
Well, I don't know how well you know Kim.
Okay.
You said that one.
But
I didn't.
I think she might have set that one up.
I actually called well-being.
We'll check there's no brown paper bags in Darren's rucksack. Kim, you should take that one.
Yeah, so one part of my other world is corporate wellbeing. So I'm a corporate wellbeing consultant, which gives me the benefit actually of working with very sizable corporate consumer accounts, so Notability, Grover, people like that. So, which is quite good because it gives me a different perspective in terms of how the return to the workplace and how the individuals in the workplace are feeling. And I was talking to someone else earlier who was saying how difficult it is to get to speak to the buyers and the procurers and so on within a business, but the individuals within that business are really struggling. So it's quite interesting to see how we are managing that as a sector battling, as a rule. We talk about mental health, not just our sector, we talk about mental health a lot. You see it because it's the one thing everyone jumps on that, caring about our staff, what we do and how we support them. But delivering actual support to them is incredibly difficult, but it's even more important when they're all remote working. So the hybrid model is going to be interesting as to how we all cope with that, not just the product and service level, but actually how we still keep those individuals engaged in their businesses. So it's an interesting one. We could probably do more as a sector, as a rule.
Mark.
Yeah, I'm just coming in because I think with my hat on as a general manager of the UK business, I'm responsible for bringing 140 folks back into our main head office.
Yeah.
And one of the things we did is we surveyed our staff as to their attitudes to all things vaccine, pandemic in general, how they felt coming back to the workplace. And I think what you find is you really have to delve into the individual comments to see there's actually a very, very wide range of opinions on all of those topics. And it's, there's not a one size fits all. So you have to have a kind of an overall approach, but it's tailored almost to the individual.
Very
complicated.
I'm very complicated running businesses at the moment, running people businesses, and so therefore, there's an opportunity on wellbeing to do it better. Alina's now given me one finger, so I am just going to ask one last question. But I'm going to try and involve everyone on this, so a little not well thought through hand raising exercise. Chris, I'm going to start. Let's just ask you a question. In our how many? And again, I'm just talking wholesaler driven, typically office supplies, maybe 60-70% of their mix is office supplies. How many dealers? Because you managed that, our database for a long time. How many dealers do you think exist?
We would say fall into our...
No, just overall office supplies dealers, where 60-70% of their mix is wholesale spend.
900.
Okay. Are we on the kind of 900 to 1,000 mark? Okay. How many were there when we launched office plan?
We had 4,000.
Okay, right. Okay. So we might
in 9 years.
Yeah. Okay.
9,500, 35 years ago.
Okay. So Kim showing her age. 35 years ago, 9,500. 9 years ago, 4,000. As we agree today, 1,000. Okay, we're going to play this hand game. Okay. Forward, wide, 18 months. Okay. Okay, where in theory, according to the forecast and everything, the great shakeout has happened. We've had the September debt reclaim, furloughs ended, we talked about M&A, distressed or not. We're starting at 1,000, right? Raise your hand if you think there is still going to be 1,000. Okay, raise your hand if you think there's going to be, I'm going to do 100 increments, Robbie, because it's Robbie. 900. Anyone on 900? 900? Okay. Okay, I'll go down to 800. Anyone on 800? Definitely frustrated auctioneer. 800? 800 dealers left. No, 700. 700. Okay, 700. 18 months. Okay, 18 months, 700. Okay, 600. Okay, I'll put my hand up. 600. Okay, 500. Okay, anyone 400? Anyone 300? Anyone 200? Anyone 100? Anyone 100? No? Okay, brilliant. Sold to the lady on the right. Okay, so I think we agreed 700. Anita now has got no fingers left to show me. Thank you very much. Thank you so much to our panel. That was amazing. Thank you, Nick. Let's go and have lunch.